Hi, I'm Chris from Rware, and today we're gonna have a look at SplineCurve, the smooth spline-based oscillator, LFO envelope generator, and wave shaper. Now, those of you who are already familiar with Rware and its modules, you know that SplineCurve is not new. But there's a lot of new things about SplineCurve. Recently, SplineCurve has received a major update with lots of new cool features. And of course, improvements as well. So let's have a look at it. Looking at the faceplate of SplineCurve, you might not notice the things that have changed, because in the faceplate there's only essentially one change. The points knob. It is set to 8 segments, and before the points knob went from 4 to 32. So 8 segments would have been right above the quarter point, I guess. But now it's almost at the beginning, and that's because the number of segments has been upgraded to 256. And as you can see at 256, the little node knobs and control points, they disappear, and we have a smooth curve. But don't be fooled by that, because it's still the same spline-based oscillator, and all of these little segments are still there. They're just so small that you can't see them, and that's why we don't display them anymore. But with this resolution, you can draw curves freely. And that gives you the option to add timbre-rich waveforms. Create them freely, draw them. And since drawing is a bit boring, we have added lots of new random generators. And these produce, from smooth shapes to very intricate shapes like this, a lot of different timbres. So, apart from the points knob, the major change is in the canvas actually. If you right-click on the canvas, a new context menu will appear with lots of manipulation and file options and curve options. Well, file options, that's where we started with the changes. SplineCurve now allows you to copy a curve, and if you change stuff, you can paste the curve back. And since this is so cool, we've also implemented that you can copy and paste between multiple instances of SplineCurve. Now that's neat. You might have noticed there's a second paste curve option, which has the little subtext keep current number of points. And this is important because now the points can change vastly, and you might create a curve with, let's say, 59 points. And you think, that's an amazing curve, but I need more detail. So you can copy the curve now, up the points, and if you paste it, it will jump back to the number of points because it remembers the points it was created at. But if you turn the points up again and you paste the curve with keeping the current number of points, it will create approximately the same curve with the new number of points. And now you can start manipulating at a way finer rate of detail. One really cool addition is now you can save your curves to a file. This is a .SplineCurve file, which contains information about the number of segments, the segments itself, and the control points. So SplineCurve can reconstruct your curve at a later point in time. So you can save the curve to file, and then you can recall it from a file. But since SplineCurve really is the only thing in existence that understands these files, Well, technically these are in JSON format, so they are human readable. If you dare to look into these files, it's just a bunch of text with numbers. But you might understand the format, and then you can manipulate it directly in the file editor. I wouldn't recommend that though, but still possible. Much talk. Let's get back to the SplineCurve. The cool option now is you can save your current curve as a WAV file or WAV file. And this is a common format which stores audio data uncompressed. Pressing this button renders the current curve to one WAV file at 48 kHz mono, 32-bit floating point, and the most important detail, 2048 sample points. And you might know that wavetables consist of a number of frames, usually 256, of exactly 2048 sample points. At least most wavetables do that. So you can use SplineCurve to create frames for a wavetable. So let's say you create 8 cool SplineCurve shapes, and you can load it up in your favorite wavetable editor as single cycle waveforms and blend between them. Now you got a cool wavetable. Wavetable oscillator from our when? Well, in the future maybe. You can not only save your current curve to a wave file, you can open arbitrary wave files and have them rendered as SplineCurves to the best of SplineCurve's ability. It will try to fit the wave file, and it works decent for most shapes, especially if you use single cycle wave files. If you use full songs, which you can do, but it will not be an accurate rendition of that wave file then. So try very short waves, single cycles at best, and maybe let's check that out. Here I got 3 instances of ImageLine Edison, which is a little wave file editor, and I use that as a buffer for storing single cycles. Makes it easier, and I do not have to show you my file system, so that's a plus. Now I can use that to drag that into SplineCurve, and SplineCurve makes a representation of that curve. Again, it's a best fit, so it is not 100% accurate, but it's close. Let's disable some of the modulation and the delay, so we can listen to that. Let's try another wave file. Ah, that's cool. That sounds a bit Brody. Let's try that one. That's a bit more elaborate. Still, SplineCurve tries its best and it sounds cool. Let's load that back up because that sounded cool. I like that. Let's copy that to the buffer. Going from the file menu to the init menu, you can now initialize SplineCurve to basic shapes. Sine curve, triangle, saw wave, square wave of course, and a ramp wave, which is essentially an inverse saw wave. The difference and why we included ramp and saw is saw wave has the same phase polarity as the other curves, so it's at the top and the left side. And if you look at the sine wave, it's also at its top portion on the left side. But if you want to use SplineCurve as a wave shaper, it might make sense to use a ramp wave so that the waveform, the resulting waveform, is not inverted. And this is a great starting point where you can then start drawing wave files, your wave shaper curves. Or let's say you start with a sine wave, then you can, it's a great starting point to add some details. And get nice sounding curves. Now, since curves can have arbitrary complexity and you can do stuff that pushes the curve outside of the boundaries, which usually is helped with the clipper here or the DC filter. You can also normalize the curve now, which finds the local maximum of either positive or negative side and scales the curve accordingly. Now you might say, wow, this tried to find the best maximum, but on the lower side there's lots of wasted space. And you're right, but in this way there's no DC offset, at least if there wasn't any DC offset to begin with. But you can also scale curve to fit, which will maximize both sides, but be aware it might introduce DC offset, which you can either filter here with this DC switch, or another option in the normalize menu, you can remove DC offset analytically, but this might push your curve back out of boundaries. So, since these are operations that will become very important later on, there are shortcuts for this. If you hold Control, or I guess it's Command on a Mac, and push the right mouse button, this is normalize. If you hold down the Shift key and press the right mouse button, this is scale to fit. And if you hold the Alt key and press right mouse button, this is remove DC offset. And you can hold Control or Command on a Mac and Alt key and then press right mouse button. This will remove the DC offset and then normalize, which will give you the maximum curve without DC offset. Neat little feature, so these are some power user tips. Alright, we have away with the boring stuff, normalization, initialization. Let's get some interesting wave shapes going. We have the new manipulate submenu, which lets us manipulate the curve directly. So we have the invert horizontally, which flips across the horizontal line. We have invert vertically, which flips across the vertical line. And then we have lots of in-between stuff. Like we can invert the left half only and leave the right half untouched, horizontally, vertically. See how that looks. We can do the same with the right half, vertically, horizontally in that case. And we can invert top and bottom half. And this is interesting, because now you can see the curve is more focused around the midline. Let's say we don't want that. So we can invert top half. Okay. Invert bottom half. And now that all of that is inverted, so stuff that is in the middle is now at the bottom and the top, respectively. So let's make this example a bit more revealing. Awesome. Let's get back to a cool random waveform and explore other manipulation options. We can mirror the left side, which will, mirror the left side across the vertical midline. We can mirror the right side, which, doesn't do much if we mirror the left to the right first. But let's say we manipulate the right side, then we mirror the right side. Back to that, just to show that again. Remove DC offset, normalize. Now that's a cool curve. Oh, stretching. Stretching is awesome. Stretching, we have factors. So let's say you multiply that by 0.5. That means the curve is stretched to half of its length. A third of its length, 3/4 of its length, 1.5 times of its length, 2 times of its length, 3 times of its length. So let's say this is a very intricate curve, but I only like the first third of it. So manipulate, stretch. And it sounds less harsh because we have less information, but this allows us to go in and manipulate that. But let's say I like that a lot, so we stretch that to 2 times of its length, which duplicates it basically. And now 3 times. And stretch that back to half of it. And we have a new sound. The final manipulation option is only related to control nodes, because the control nodes dictate how the individual node points are, let's say, interpolated and interpreted. And if we align with the left point, we can see that all of these sharp twists and turns are gone. So let's scale the number of points down. By the way, another power user tip: if you hold down the shift key while moving the knob, the current curve is preserved. And if you then release the knob, it will try to fit the curve you had onto the new number of points. That works in both directions. That's a really cool addition, I guess. So let's have a look at the control nodes again. Let's randomize real quick. And if we align with the left point, the curve, that's the white line in between all those nodes, is now restricted to only these nodes. So it cannot go above or below. It's very much different if we go between adjacent points. So the control nodes will be in the middle between the point to their left and to their right. And we can see that the curve now overshoots the node points. And this is very much exaggerated if we align them with the right point, because then it's only overshoots basically. Which can be cool. It depends on the flavor. The more you go to the left, the smoother the curve will be. The more you go to the right, the more erratic the curve will be, and the more rich and timbre it'll be. And since this is a very delicate operation, there's percentages. So let's say I have this cool timbre that I want to keep, but I want to make it a little bit more smooth. I can align with the left point at 50%, which will shift all of these control nodes relative to the current position 50% to the left. And now the overshoots are less drastic. If I want drastic, I can randomize. Let's say we randomize 10%. Okay, let's say we go more extreme, 50%. A lot more high frequency content. And if we go full on, the curve still follows somewhat the original shape, but since the control points are randomized, the actual curve goes wild. And in this number of segments, it doesn't sound like much, but if we increase that, and then we randomize, let's say by 10%, we get the high frequency buzzing. A lot more high frequency content, which can sound cool. Let's fish for some cool randomized curve. Okay, that sounds cool. Okay, whatever. We can also randomize all of the control nodes, but within their adjacent points, so they will not exceed the point to the left and right. But within that range, completely random. And that can have its own sound. You have to try it. There are some applications. Most of the time you want to randomize them disregarding their left and right node though. Alright, so next up, the blend menu. and we have the blending options with the same wave shapes from the initialize, but with percentages. So let's say I have this sound that we currently have, and it sounds cool and all, but it's a little thin. I need more bass. So let's blend it with a sine wave then. Let's go with 50%. And we have a lot more low frequency content. Remove DC, normalize. Let's try that again. Let's blend it with sine wave again. Less high frequency content, but a strong fundamental. You can also blend with triangle. Let's get a hold of another curve and blend with a saw wave. Normalize. That's cool. Square wave. Again, a little bit more sine. A little bit more saw. Add specs and modulation to show off. Okay, I'm getting lost again. So these are the blend options. You can make arbitrary waveforms, and if they sound tinny or thin, my power user tip is blend them with a sine wave, normalize, and you will increase the fundamental. Alright, for the fun part, distort. Here we have some power shaping options and some folding and rectification options. Power shape is basically a power function that will push the curve outwards. That's very cool if you have a curve that is a bit weak. So you blend with a sine, another power tip here, and then you distort it like 3 times. Very strong tone, still a strong fundamental. Nice. Power shape in is kind of the opposite. Instead of pushing the curve outwards, it moves the curve inwards. Let's see it in action. I'm moving in a little. Let's do that again with a higher factor. And the curve moves in. This can be cool. Let's fish for a cool random waveform. If you have a wave that's kind of stuck to the top and bottom, but has lots of content that is not quite at the top and bottom, you can try power shaping it in. Let's blend with a sine and then power shape out. Alright, we have sine fold, which is a wave folder that's based on a sine wave. And we have different factors, so the current curve is multiplied by that factor and then put into the wave folder. So if we have ×2, the curve will fold, and since it's double in volume, it will fold back to the midline. By the way, full undo redo support now. So let's do that again with a different factor, ×3, it folds. From the midline it's at top, then ×2 would be at the midline, and ×3 again would be folding back right to the bottom. Let's undo that and try another distortion. Let's try trifolding, which is triangle-based folding, ×2. The difference to the sine wave folder is that it has sharp edges instead of gradual edges as the sine wave folder. I guess the best way to show that would be with a sine wave. Let's distort that with the sine fold, and you can see here it's kind of smooth. And if we use the trifold, sharp edges. The sharper the edges, the more timbre is added, the more overtones are added. But also it's more bossy and less bassy. That makes sense. Let's keep the sine wave for now and show off the saw fold, which is kind of a cool wave folder. It's essentially wave wrapping. So content that exceeds the top and bottom boundary is warped to the other side. So if it exceeds the top, it will go through a portal and appear at the bottom. So let's look at that real quick. So here the curve is multiplied by 2, and instead of folding back, it just appears at the bottom. And this is the most overtone rich folding and can create some very wild curves. Let's create some random curve and try the saw folder again. Yeah, very bossy. Blend that with a sine wave. Power shape. Now that's a cool sound. And we're not done. Let's try the sine wave folder. It's cool. Power shape again. Blend with sine wave. Power shape again. Yeah, I could go on all day with this. It's just so much fun. Last but not least, we have rectification. Half rectify removes the bottom half and just nulls it to the midline. Let's go back. Full rectification inverts the bottom half, so it is mirrored at the midline. And here's a cool thing you can do if you have a curve that's stuck to the bottom or to the top and is not really rich in volume, let's put it this way. You can remove the DC offset, or maybe you can't see if I press keys on my keyboard, so normalize, remove DC offset, normalize curve. And yeah, it's basically more normalized because we have these two spikes that are generated by the control points, so let's get rid of that real quick. And now normalize. Very bossy. Again, power user trick, blend with sine, power shape. Cool waveform. Let's apply modulation again. Ah, I like that. Okay, again, half rectify and full rectify. Remove DC, normalize, cool curve. Now, distortion is applied to the level, which means the point where the curve is at. So you have the midline, and if it's higher at the top, it has a higher level. If it's higher at the bottom, it also has a higher level because the distance from the midline. It's positive level, negative level. Now, with distortion, you can manipulate the curve vertically, but not necessarily horizontally. And to do that, there's phase distortion, because you have to think this curve is read out by a phaser, which goes through all of the values and checks at which height the current curve is, and then it outputs that. And if you manipulate that ramp that goes from each point to each point and have it skip points or have it move over points faster or less fast, then the curve will be morphed, skewed, distorted along this horizontal line. So let's get a cool curve going. I like that. And let's look at phase distortion in X direction, so horizontal. And these are essentially the same as here, but it's destructive. So it works on the curve that's shown and not on the output. Well, by proxy it still works on the output, because if you manipulate that curve, this curve is output, and yeah. So if I move this knob, we can see the orange curve indicator shows the curve is skewed to the right. And if I reverse that and phase distort by, let's say, 75%, essentially the same happens, but now it's baked into the curve. And I can do that with negative values, so the curve is skewed to the left, which is essentially the same as turning this to the left and right. I have also phase distortion in Y direction, which is vertical, but it does not directly apply to the curve, it applies to the phaser. And it's very much related to X and Y, to the X direction, but it's a little different in effect. So let's go to the extreme. If I put -1, the phaser will basically be at 0 for all the left half and then ramp up to its max value. Let's undo that and let's choose a more gentle value. See, it's similar behavior but not the same as PDX. It has its use cases. Sometimes you want the phase distortion in X direction because it does not go to the extreme that the PDY goes, which essentially nulls one side if you go to full value, and so on. Next up, squeeze and stretch. This is PDS down here. To the right side is stretch, to the left side is squeeze. And stretch stretches the curve outwards from the middle, and squeeze squeezes it inward. And if we do phase distortion, it's essentially the same. Let's undo that. Now stretch. Let's undo that. Then we have these bend modes, which bend the curve in one direction. Bend plus, bend minus. And of course bend plus minus, which move the curve outwards and inwards, but in a bending motion. So the difference between bending and squeezing stretching is that there is no added lines. So if you see, if I squeeze the curve, there's a line where the curve is stretched out. But if I bend the curve will gradually approach that. And ultimately there will be a line, but it's way smoother. But never mind. Okay, now we have found dozens of ways to add harmonic content to our curves. Let's remove that. Here in the filter section we have some very unorthodox filters. Unorthodox for audio because these are more like image-based filters. So you might have heard about a median filter or a Gaussian filter, because if you use Photoshop or any image editing software, those are the kind of filters that you apply to images. Let's use a median filter on this intricate curve. Let's choose median 3. And you can see, or let's say here, that the high frequency content is disappearing and the curve is moving, because the median filter essentially takes creates a window. It goes through all of the points and takes 3 points or 5 points depending on which filter you take, and takes the mid value of that window of that 3 or 5 values and applies that as the current value. And the result of that is it's kind of smoothing. But it has its limits. Eventually it will stop smoothing because all of these values are already ordered. The effect is somewhat of a low pass. Moving average, that's more of a low pass. So it's a window-based filter as well. It takes 3 or 5 values and takes the average of these values and takes that as the new value that is applied to the current point. So let's hear that again. Let's do that one more time. See, the curve is moving out. Now Gaussian, that's also kind of a low pass filter. Let's see, we have narrow, regular and wide, and of course 2 window sizes, 3 and 5. Narrow has the least effect, and of course wide has the most effect. And if you choose a bigger window size, it also has more effect. So let's create an intricate curve. We apply Gaussian 5 wide. Let's compare that to Gaussian 5 narrow. The final of the low-pass ASK filters is the Kalman filter. And Kalman filters are a bit weird. Kalman filters try to guess the next value, and then they take the real value that is next and kind of choose a value that you think will fit best. So Kalman filters try to remove noise. And noise is essentially high frequency content. Or not essentially, but oversimplified. So if we apply a Kalman filter, it tries to get rid of this high frequency content that it deems to be noise, the noise in the signal, and that has a low passing effect. These 6 filters all have different parameters, and essentially from top to bottom there is more or less effect. So let's choose Kalman 1. Let's try that with Kalman 2. Kalman 3 is a good general purpose. Kalman 4 has great smoothing, but it depends on the curve. So with these Kalman filters you can't really tell which effect you can't tell which effect it'll have if you know your Kalman filters, but it's more of a thing you have to try. Some work better on curves, on some curves, and others work better on other curves. It's just how it is. So let's do Kalman 5 last. Okay, now we got that out of the way. Moving difference, inverse moving average, Sobel, and Laplacian, these are all kind of high-pass equivalents. These are not high-pass filters by any means, but they kind of have a high-pass effect. So moving difference is similar to moving average. It is a window that is moving over the curve, and it takes the difference of the last value and the current value. And since this is a very drastic effect, there's a percentage you can apply that to. So let's say we do 50%. Or maybe let's go back to 100% so you can hear it in effect. It is very quiet now, so let's normalize the curve. Remove DC offset. Very buzzy, no more low frequency content. Essentially high pass filter. Let's go back. Inverse moving average is the moving average filter, but inverted. So the moving average is subtracted from the original signal, which then again creates a high passing filter effect. Very much similar to the moving difference, but different enough to have it. So as you can see, the spikes are a lot higher. We compare that. Let's move back. Difference. We now remove DC and normalize. Let's compare that to inverse moving average. Yeah. Sobel filter, and that one I have to look up. Just a second. Yeah, Sobel filter detects edges and transitions in the signal and removes stationary content. And that does sound like a high-pass filter. And that's the effect. It sounds high-pass-ish. So it's also a windowed filter. Let's do 5 for more effect. It has found all of the edges and transitions and greatly exaggerated them while removing the stationary content. So as you can see here, it's flat, it has nulled the signal, and before that was also a line. Laplacian filter, that's similar, but the difference is it detects rapid intensity changes and also removes the stationary content that way. But it is kind of a different approach. And the effect is more drastic. But here, essentially what you're looking at here, the higher the spike is, the more intense the change at that point was before. Let's go back to the original curve. So here, around here, there was a huge spike, and we can see there's basically a jump in the signal. So that's a huge change, and the Laplacian filter has detected that. Now, only filtering, that would be boring. So since we have a lot of windowed filters, there's also random filters. And from top to bottom, random 1 to 4, it increases in intensity. We apply random 1. Waveform is a bit randomized. Random 4. Yeah, random frequency content. Well, not frequency content, but random filtering of the wave, more or less. That can give great results, but it's of course random. Let's try that on another waveform. Try that again. Normalize. Let's try with this waveform one last time. Sounds cool enough. Alright, last but not least, here are all of the new random engines. So the original engine, still there, original, was kind of based on changes. It tried to keep plateaus in the signal to not be just noise interpolated. Now we have lots of new random engines that are based on different things. So here you can choose either random engine, that's the default. So every time you press the random button, it chooses a random engine, and the tooltip also shows which engine was used to generate the current waveform. And there's much more diversity in these wave shapes that are generated. So real quick, let's go over them. The original, that's the most erratic at the new number of segments, because it was initially designed for a maximum of 32 segments. And if we look at that, interesting waves work great. But if we increase the number of points, it gets too wild. So let's look at one of the new ones, flowing. And if we select one of the engines, you can see it's no longer random which engine is chosen. It will always be the one that's currently selected. So flowing produces smoothly flowing but still complex waveforms. So there's gradual changes, smooth curves, but it's still complex and rich in timbre. And again, power user tip: if it gets too rich, blend with sine wave and power shape. Let's see, falling. That is also kind of a smooth one, but it has a lot more steps, and it's always kind of falling down, falling up. I don't know. It's a lot brighter than flowing. Let's put it this way. Next up, stepping. And as the name suggests, lots of steps. Again, a waveform generator that produces waveforms that are rich in high frequencies and that are, let's describe it, squarish. And if it's too buzzy, blend with sine, power shape. The harm produces somewhat inharmonic sounding curves that are of course still harmonic because this is periodic, so there's only harmonic ratio partials, but some of them are accentuated more, and that's why it sounds kind of ringy, kind of resonanty, kind of a little bit out of tune. I like that one a lot. It generates very interesting spectra, which also work great when manipulated. And of course also work amazingly well as frequency modulation or phase modulation carriers or operators. Let's go. Recurse. This one generates the least complex looking and most smooth looking curves. But they can get quite complex as well, of course. And they have like a sawish timbre, if I had to describe it this way. But still smooth. Fracts. That's somewhat loosely based on the fractalizer effect that was in early hardware oscillators. Well, not early, it's still present in the most recent oscillator. It's fractalizer. Essentially what fractalizer does is window sync with some more bells and whistles, and here that concept is taken to the extreme, and that produces a very throaty sound. Kind of acidic. Don't know how to describe that better. But most of the time these are high in high frequency content, but do not have as strong as fundamental. And to alleviate that, blend with sine. You know the drill by now. Power shape. Alright, let's go attracted. And that's a random waveform generator that's based on chaotic attractors. Much like a tractor oscillator, but that one is less restricted and let loose, because it only generates this one window, this one single cycle that is then repeated. And therefore we can remove all of the shackles that keep a tractor oscillator harmonic. Let's say it like that. Also great for modulation. Let's see, partial. That is an additive-based generator that generates random harmonic content. Well, it's not entirely random, it follows some rules, because random is just random, but we want to generate useful waveforms, so less random in the random. Yeah, whatever. Let's listen to some examples. These work great as modulation sources as well for your FM patches, and they also like modulation. That's here with the PDX, for example. Can generate interesting spectra. And last but not least, the stack, which is kind of a stack of basic shapes that form more complex shapes from these basic shapes. So here it's clearly a stack of different saways that are a bit manipulated, but that can also blend into squares. Can generate interesting shapes. And we can of course always tone it down, increase the number of points, and still have our random engines produce interesting shapes. That we can then further manipulate. Distort. Blend. And filter. And distort. And phase distort. And filter, and distort, and so on. And if you're finally done, we can copy that curve, paste it, do some more stuff on the other side. And listen to the example with our new shapes. So that's about it. A very lengthy show and tell of the new features of SplineCurve. I hope you liked it. Hope you learned something today about these awesome features in SplineCurve and how awesome SplineCurve as a module is in general. Okay, I'll stop now. As always, if you like that, check out SplineCurve, link in the description. It has a 7 days demo period, and it's also part of the currently ongoing Black Friday sale. Lots of cool ARA modules, our evergreens, are on deep discount, up to, I guess, 50% or just above 50%. SplineCurve, also on deep discount. Get it now. I'd also appreciate if you gave this video a like and this channel a subscribe. Thanks a lot for doing that. Check out the other videos and the shorts that I keep uploading. These are basically short patches that demonstrate some cool features of my modules. The most recent short actually is a teaser of these new SplineCurve features. Yeah, that's it. Have fun patching. See you around.